There's a difference between seeing clearly and actually steering your life. You can wake up to the world, you can understand the structures, you can question the systems, and still be moving without direction. I know that because I did it. For a long time, I thought awareness meant progress, that if I understood enough, clarity would naturally follow. But understanding isn't the same as choosing. And when my life eventually forced me to confront that, I realized something I should have known all along. If you're not consciously steering, you're drifting. And drift doesn't feel dramatic, it feels normal. Until something breaks. There's a line in The Matrix that I didn't really understand when I first watched it. Cypher says, "Why oh why didn't I take the blue pill?" And when I was younger, I remember thinking, how could anyone possibly want to go back to being blind once they'd seen the truth? I thought awakening was the prize, the end goal, the thing everyone should want. But the older I've got, the more I've lived, the more I've waited, the more I've lost, the more that line has stayed with me. Because there are days now where I understand exactly what he meant. Not because ignorance is better, but because awareness comes with a cost nobody really prepares you for. The first Matrix film makes awakening look decisive. One pill, one choice, one revelation. Suddenly you see clearly. You understand the system. You see how it operates. You realize why you always fell out of place. Why the world never quite fit the way you were told it should. And at first, that awareness feels like empowering, feels like relief, like finally discovering you're not broken, like you've stepped behind the curtain. It feels like progress, like you've advanced to a higher level of understanding. My own awakening didn't come in one dramatic revelation. It unfolded slowly, through burnout, through questions that wouldn't leave me alone, through watching promises not materialise, through realising that waiting isn't the same as moving. At the beginning, awareness feels like momentum. You connect dots, you interpret patterns, you feel intellectually ahead. You feel like you've cracked something. But awareness isn't the same as agency. And the first Matrix stops just as Neo begins to bend the rules. Real life doesn't. Real life feels much more like the second and third Matrix films. Zion, underground, crowded, under pressure. Everyone knows something isn't right. Everyone sees the cracks, and yet nothing really changes. Everyone's awake and still struggling. This is the part that doesn't get talked about enough, because once you wake up, the world doesn't rearrange itself to meet you halfway. The bills are still there. The cost of living keeps rising. Housing feels out of reach. Opportunities feel locked behind doors you don't have keys for. The illusion might be gone, but the constraints remain. That's the part no one tells you about awakening. It doesn't dismantle the structures overnight. It just makes you aware of them. And awareness without movement can feel suffocating. So people wake up and still feel trapped. Not because they're incapable, but because awareness alone doesn't move anything. And that's when the excitement of waking up turns into exhaustion. That's when awakening stops feeling like freedom and starts feeling like weight. No one really prepares you for what awareness does to you internally. It sharpens everything. You notice more, you feel more, you question more. You start to see where the systems strain. And with that comes a quiet pressure. Because once you see clearly, you can't pretend you didn't. You start feeling responsible for your choices, for your direction, for the world around you. Even if you don't have the tools yet, that tension between what you understand and what you can actually influence is exhausting. You can analyze the systems, you can explain the patterns, you know more, but you're not yet moving differently. That's when burnout creeps in. That's when awakening doesn't feel enlightened. It feels heavy. Because awareness without direction drains energy. That's where Cypher stops sounding stupid and starts sounding human. Not weak, not ignorant, just tired. When you're not awake, ignorance cushions the edges of life. When you don't see the full picture, you don't feel the full weight. You can move through your routines without questioning them. You can numb out more easily, drink a bit more, scroll a bit longer, lose yourself in habits, stay busy enough not to look too closely. And for a while, that works. But once you wake up, those distractions lose their effect. You can't unsee what you've seen. You feel the gap between what you know and how you're living. And if you don't replace them with something grounding, you're left exposed. That's why some people wake up and then spiral, because awakening pulls you out of comfort before you've built anything solid to stand on. And if you haven't built discipline, structure, movement, direction, you're left standing in that awareness without stability. Awakening removed the illusion, but didn't yet give you footing. And in that space, the blue pill starts to look appealing, not because it's true, but because it's comfortable. Not better, comfortable. Follow the White Rabbit. It's one of the most quoted lines in the film, but most people don't really sit with it. I've always found it interesting that the rabbit is white. White isn't just a colour, it's all colours combined. Awakening often starts like that, as wholeness. Everything connects. You see the patterns. You feel like you've stepped into a bigger picture. But if you're not careful, that wholeness fragments again. Into rabbit holes, into endless threads, into competing explanations. You move from curiosity into fixation, from integration into fragmentation. And it's very easy to disappear down tunnels, to go deeper and deeper and forget to come back up. I've been there myself. For a few years, I went very deep, not just curious, consumed. So awake in my head that I drifted out of my body. I was analysing everything, questioning everything, connecting patterns everywhere. And the deeper I went, the heavier it felt. Because there's no end point down there, no resolution, no solution, just more layers. And eventually, it stops being about understanding and starts being about blame, about unseen forces, about hidden control. And the more you live in that space, the smaller you feel. Like something else is steering, like your power is somewhere else. That's the trap, not awareness, but disembodiment. Because when your focus is always out there, you stop building in here. And I didn't realise how far I drifted. The Matrix hints at this quietly. Humans aren't just trapped physically, they're trapped mentally. And the awakening that never returns to the body is still captivity. For a long time, I softened this part of the story. I'd say that waiting nearly broke me, but that's not true. It did break me. When my marriage ended, it wasn't just a relationship finishing. It was the moment I could no longer pretend I was steering my own life. Because if I'm honest, I had already pulled away long before it ended. I was waiting for clarity, waiting for circumstances to change, waiting for something external to move so I didn't have to. And in that waiting, I drifted. I lost direction, I lost momentum, I lost that internal fire that makes you choose. The hardest part, the thing I wanted most, was right in front of me, my wife. But I didn't fully see that until I lost her. And when there was no hope of getting back together, when it was truly definitively over, that's when it shattered me. Not because she destroyed me, but because the illusion that I was still in control collapsed. I broke, not into pieces, into many. Grief, regret, love, shame, anger, clarity. All these colours I'd suppressed while I was drifting. And it had to happen, because as long as I was waiting, I wasn't choosing. And sometimes the only way you take the wheel back is when the ship hits something hard enough that you can't pretend you're steering anymore. After it broke, I did what I always did. I went back into my head, analysing the timeline, reconstructing conversations, trying to rewrite the ending in hindsight, why it happened, what I could have done differently, whether there was still a way back. Rabbit hole thinking. I thought if I understood it perfectly, it would hurt less. But understanding wasn't the missing piece. I had drifted, and no amount of analysis was going to rebuild direction. And that was harder to admit, because direction means ownership. So instead of trying to restore the version of myself I'd lost, I started sitting with the fragments, one by one. Grief without defense, regret without rewriting, love without bargaining, shame without projection. And something shifted. Those pieces stopped feeling like damage and started feeling like data, like feedback, like lessons, like energy, like fuel. And when you bring all colours back together, they don't stay fragmented. They become white, wholeness. Not the white rabbit that leads you into tunnels, but the white that leads you out of endless thinking, out of paralysis, out of waiting, back into the body, back into choice, back into motion. Because embodiment isn't about having everything figured out. It's about being here, breathing, moving, choosing. That's why the fourth Matrix film resonated with me differently. It wasn't about rebellion. It wasn't about defeating a system. There was no final villain, no neat resolution, no prophecy that had to be fulfilled. It felt quieter, less about overthrowing something and more about navigating something. The sense that the old structures are still there, but not operating the way they used to. Fragmentation, momentum without direction, power without clarity. And that felt closer to real life, not a perfectly controlled machine, but something drifting, something unstable, something no one is fully steering. And that's uncomfortable, because if there's no master plan, there's no one to blame. The future isn't written, and that's terrifying, but it's also freeing. Because if no one is truly in control, then responsibility returns to you. I don't actually think we're living inside some perfectly controlled system. I don't think there's a group somewhere pulling all the strings. If anything, it feels like the opposite. It feels like the people who are meant to be steering things lost control a long time ago. Rules that haven't evolved, systems built for a different era, trying to function in a new one. Momentum without direction, outdated structures. And when structures don't adapt, they drift. And when structures drift, people feel it. When there's no direction, people fragment. So we look for explanations, we look for hidden order, we look for someone to blame. Because it's easier to believe in control than to accept uncertainty. But uncertainty means something important. It means the story isn't fixed. It means the outcome isn't predetermined. And that means your direction matters. Here's what that realization changed for me. If there isn't some architect behind it all, if the world isn't perfectly directed, then the story isn't fixed. And if the story isn't fixed, your role in it isn't either. You don't wait to be saved. You don't wait for a prophecy. You don't wait for someone else to bend the rules. You choose. Discipline, routine, movement. Agency becomes daily, not philosophical. Daily. How you wake up, how you move your body, how you structure your time, what you build. Small acts of steering, small corrections, small decisions that compound. Not because someone is watching, but because no one is. And when you accept that, your direction becomes the difference. You stop drifting, you begin. That's embodiment. For me, embodiment is integration, mind, body, soul. Not as separate concepts, but as one system. Your soul holds the vision, your mind builds the structure, your body carries it into reality. When one is missing, you drift. When one dominates, you fragment. But when they align, confidence returns. You feel whole. You don't feel pulled in opposite directions. You wake up knowing what you're building. You move with intention. You stop chasing clarity because you're living it. That's embodiment. This is the part I had to understand properly. When I watched the fourth Matrix film, I kept thinking it was about reunion, Neo and Trinity finding their way back to each other. But when you actually look closely, it's not just about love, it's really about alignment. Look closely, Neo is building his world through a game. He's literally coding the world he once lived in. Even if he doesn't fully remember who he is, he's expressing it. And Trinity, she's building bikes, something she's always loved. Even inside a different life, she gravitates towards what feels like her. They're both living fragments of their authentic selves, suppressed externally, aligned internally. That's why they can reconnect, because they're not empty. They're not fully awake, but they're not disconnected from themselves either. I wasn't. I loved her, but I wasn't building my vision. I wasn't creating. I was waiting for clarity, waiting for circumstances. I was waiting for my life to move before I did. And love cannot compensate for drift. Love can awaken you, but alignment sustains you. They reunited because they were aligned. I had to realign after it ended. That was my lesson. The Matrix was never really about red pills and blue pills. That was just the doorway. It was always about what happens after you wake up. Not escaping a system, but remembering who you are inside it. Because once you stop outsourcing control, life gets clearer, not easier, clearer. You wake up with direction, you move your body, you build what feels like you. You connect with people who are doing the same, and joy returns. Not because the world changes overnight, but because you do. And when enough individuals stop drifting, community forms. Not around fear, but around purpose. Awakening doesn't end in isolation. It leads back to people, to shared growth, to build something real. Because when people have direction and connection, they don't need escape. They need somewhere to belong. That's the shift for me, from analysing the world to building inside it, from waiting to creating. And that feels lighter, because the future isn't written, it's built. And I'd rather build it consciously than drift through it unconsciously. Now I'm going to leave it there, guys. Slanjua. Ciao.